Welcome to the fourth night of the Spark Writing Festival. So tonight we are joined by oral historian Michelle Little. So Michelle Little is an oral historian living in Birmingham, Alabama. She has been interviewing Alabama natives for over a decade and is passionate about preserving local stories. Prior to working as an independent oral historian and audio producer, Little founded an oral history project at Samford University. She designed and directed large-scale interviewing projects and developed methods to incorporate oral history and podcasting into the classroom. Since leaving Samford in 2019, she has worked extensively with the Southern Foodways Alliance and WBHM 90.3. She is currently developing an oral history-based walking tour of Birmingham's Central Business District. She holds a bachelor's in history from Samford University and a master's in theological studies from Beeson Divinity School. She previously served on the Emerging Professionals Committee and Independent Practitioners Task Force of the Oral History Association. Michelle is married to Terry and they have a Jack Russell Molly. When she's not researching and interviewing, Michelle enjoys trying out recent additions to the Birmingham food scene and is always on the hunt for the best latte. So, all right, Michelle, take it away.
All right, thank you, Haley, and thanks everyone for checking in tonight. I'm really excited to talk to people that are hoping to incorporate oral history, and, for writing and for new and unique purposes. I think oral history can be used for so many different things, and so today I want to first give you just kind of a broad overview of what oral history is, what we mean when we use that term, and why we should care about it. And then second, I want to kind of go over our ethical standards as oral historians, and best practices when you're conducting an interview or conducting an interview project. And then finally, hopefully if we have time, I'm going to give you just a brief overview of some equipment that you might use and some things that I've found helpful for collecting audio and working through those logistics. So when we say oral history, what does that mean? Essentially, it's interviewing people, but it's a good bit different than journalistic style interviewing. Oral history is collecting life history narratives. It's long form storytelling. And we go into these interviews with no set objective or storyline in mind. So we go in very open-minded to collect what that person has to tell us that day. And so it's a really unique way to collect history. And what's really cool is that you're creating a new primary resource. And so a primary resource is something you can put in an archive, and then researchers, students for years on out can go back and use that. This is a first person narrative. They can use that for writing and further research. And so in any research paper or story, you always need to have primary resources. And so it's wonderful that by doing this, to help with your writing, you're also creating something that adds value and you're putting it in the library. So much is possible here. The way I like to think about what oral history is the word that I named my business. It's acoustate. And so you think of the word acoustic, that's where that comes from. And this is a Greek word that means hear, listen, and learn. And so, yes, I'm kind of a nerd that took Greek for a few semesters in graduate school. I know just enough to be dangerous, but that's all. So hearing, listening, and learning. These are three actions that you might not always connect in your day-to-day life. And I remember coming across this word during my first semester of studying the language, and I asked my professor, I said, how can this word acoustate have these three different meanings? And he said, well, think of it like this. If I tell my son to take out the garbage, and then I say, did you hear me? I'm not asking, did you actually hear the words that are coming out of my mouth? I'm asking, Did you hear what I said with and understand it with the intent to actually take action and do something with what I told you? Are you going to take the garbage out? So it was just kind of a funny example that just stuck with me, that, this is deep listening. It's not just passively, you're truly being changed by what you're hearing. And so both in the moment of the interview and then for the perpetuity of that audio and that transcript. So, and I truly leave every interview that I do a little different. I mean, if you sit with someone for over an hour and you're asking question after question and listening to their life narrative, it changes you. You just take a little bit from every interview. It's just such a powerful experience. So it's deep listening. And this is so important because there's so many voices now and just throughout recorded history that have not been collected, that are not on the record. And so these may be lost, and of people that I may not know. And, there's so many people that we have access to that we can sit with and record these stories. And then that places these experiences within a broader social and historical context in the archive. So, and what so often bores students about history is they think it's just memorizing dates and names and dry facts. But that's not, history is truly our day-to-day lives, our lived experiences. And I think we probably truly understand that a little more now in 2022 than we did a few years ago, having lived through a pandemic and so much that's happened in these last few years. I think now maybe we get that that every day is history. This time that we've lived through is going to be studied. So, but that's always true. That's always been true. So it's just really cool to be able to sit with someone and make a very accurate record of that. And so, think through family members that and close friends and people in your community that may have really amazing narratives and that you could sit and talk to and record those, and that may inspire you for your writing. And it's also just a really cool way to dive into that character and the way that person is telling that story, and just how a person tells you a story says just as much as the story itself. Like, are they very emotional about telling it? Are they speaking very quietly? Are they excited to tell you the story? So there's so much that the audio tells you that just the written word wouldn't tell you. But you can have all this together, and then you may want to write a podcast. So there's so many options that could come from the audio. So that's just a very broad overview of what we mean when we use the term oral history, because in the last 7 to 8 years, a lot of journalists and you'll see the oral history of The Office, or the oral, you'll see it's become kind of a catchphrase. And I like that people are using the term oral history, but this is what practitioners mean when they use the term oral history. So now I want to talk to you a little bit about our ethical standards as oral historians. And please, if you have any questions, I guess you could maybe put it in chat, or there might be a way to raise your hand. But I know that I'm covering a ton of ground here. And so please just pop in and let me know if you have any questions. And I'll definitely leave time at the end for questions as well. So the ethical standards we abide by, it's a very weighty and meaningful thing to collect someone's audio, to capture their story. This is someone's life history, and so you always want to treat that with the utmost of care. It's very much a golden rule situation: do unto others as you would have done unto you. And so I always tell students to keep that in mind throughout the whole process. And so you always want to consider your narrator. I use the term narrator, but your interviewee, the person you're interviewing, you always want to keep your narrator in mind at every step of the project. So ethical standards and project planning very much go hand in hand. Your go-to resource before you start a project and as you're working your way through the project is going to be the Oral History Association. And you can, if you just go to oralhistory.org, that is their website. And they have been the principal organization for all things oral history since 1966. It is an amazing group of folks. And they're international. We're based in the United States, but we have people all over the world. And they set every year, at a conference, we review ethical standards, best practices, go over challenges in the field, new technology, and they update all of that every year. So on their website, you can access all of these documents, this suite of documents on ethics. And like I said, the conference every year, if you really get into this, it is the best group of people you'll ever meet. It's writers, teachers, documentarians, college professors, just, videographers, filmmakers. It's such a cool group, and everybody uses oral history in different ways. And it's just wonderful to meet people from all over that do this kind of work. So when we think about the ethics and the entire process, we think about it in terms of this web of mutual responsibility throughout the interview process. And so everybody involved in the work, from you as the interviewer, to the narrator, to the archivist, to researchers that are going to use this material maybe in 20 years, we're all kind of working together to preserve that person's their right of privacy, their safety, their dignity, and that story. We're all working together to preserve that, either in the way we're quoting it, or the way the transcription's done, or where it is housed. It's a long process. So in order to really ensure fair treatment from beginning to end, I'm gonna recommend three top things. Now, if you look at the OHA website and the whole ethical statement, it's a lot, and I encourage you to read through it. But tonight, I'm just going to tell you three things that I think are absolutely necessary to make sure you're doing this ethically. So first and foremost would be informed consent with your narrator. So some type of release form that explains all the future uses of their audio, what you're going to do with this, where you're going to house it, or if you're not going to send it to an archive, if it's just going to live on your computer. That's fine, that you need to do what's going to work for you, but just have something in writing that both of you will sign. And you can look on the Library of Congress website, has a great sample release form. Of course, the OHA website is going to have some great samples that you can check out. So this doesn't have to be elaborate. It's usually just a one-page thing, but that would be the first thing I recommend. Sorry, I don't talk to this much anymore. So, okay. So the release form is number one. The second thing I would absolutely recommend is this review process. So one of the big things that sets us apart from journalists is that we allow the narrator to review the transcript. They have the final word, the final say on what gets released. And so we want to make sure they're happy with the way their story is being preserved. So if they, realize later they really wish they hadn't told that story, or, whatever it is, that if they want to have it redacted, we absolutely comply with that. So typically this happens by, I'll have the interview transcribed, and then I take it to the narrator, and they have time to look at it. So however you want to do that process, but that would be the second most important thing. And then third is just doing your research before the interview. So you want to be respectful of your narrator's time, be respectful of your own time. And so for any interview I'm preparing to do, I spend at least 5 to 6 hours, sometimes a day or two, prepping, research, everything I can find on that person, prepping for whatever subject I also want to discuss with them in addition to their life history. So just do that ahead of time, be prepared, so that you're not wasting anybody's time, and that you get good material from the interview. So it helps them. So those are the three main things: release form, review process, do your research. And then fourth, if you have a little bit of extra time, the other thing I really like to do is to put together kind of a one sheet of your goals for this project, what your outcomes are going to be, kind of like you would do if you're writing a grant proposal. So, are you researching your family history? Are you doing interviews about the pandemic? Are you doing interviews about your community? Are you going to publish them on a website? Are you going to write a book? How many narrators are you going to interview? So I put all that together, and then I give that to the person I'm asking if I can interview them, so that they just have a full picture of what this project is and what I'm going to do with it. So I think that's really helpful. I totally get it if you don't have time to do that. So that would be my fourth recommendation. So that's all I'm gonna go over about ethics, because I know that you might just be doing a tiny piece of that, maybe just 1 or 2 interviews. So I don't want to go into everything, but I really encourage you to check out the Oral History Association website and that full document on ethics. And again, if anybody has a question about ethics and the way we do things versus journalism, raise your Zoom hand or whatever the lingo is. So next, we're going to talk about just best practices for actually moving through a successful interview or a full project. And so this is going to be a lot of information, because there can be more involved than people might think. So I tried to shorten this as much as I could. So the first thing I recommend when you're setting out to do an interview is to meet with the person you want to interview in person, if at all possible. And so of course now you could do this on Zoom, but at least talk to them, like actually talk to them on the phone. Don't just text or email, because you want to kind of establish a few things. First of all, you want this person to trust you. So especially if it's someone you've never met, that you don't have a relationship with, even just meeting in person for 15 minutes, if that's all anyone has time with, it can go a long way in just establishing that relationship, making sure they're comfortable with you. And then 2, you also really want to get a sense of how this person speaks. Are they a really fast talker, or do they talk a ton? Are you going to have a hard time getting in a question, or do they hardly talk at all? Are you going to have to just really draw out information, or your interview is going to be over in 5 minutes? Or do they talk really quiet? So it just helps so much to know like the cadence and the flow and how that interview is going to feel. I guess it'd kind of be like if you could go on a pre-date, like if you're going to have a first date with someone, but if you could like just maybe like have that coffee and know like, can I have dinner with this person? Like, are we going to be able to chat for an hour? I mean, that would probably be helpful. So, so that's my like number one recommendation. Get a preview of what you're in for. And then you can plan, you know, where you're going to do the interview. Like you can set a lot of plans in that first meeting. And then, like I was saying, doing your research, I'm going to hound that home again. But when you want to prep your line of questioning, or I used to tell students to do more of an outline of what they want to talk about rather than just a straight up list of 20 questions. And I did that because sometimes students would get very nervous and then they would just, okay, and question number 3 is blah, blah, blah. And they wouldn't listen and then try to come up with the follow-up questions based on what their narrator was saying. So, I mean, you're an adult, you can tell if you're going to get nervous and you really just need a basic outline so that you don't fall into that trap of just going question to question to question. But either way, you want to either have a full outline or, you know, a basic sketch of your questions. Another thing I like to do is, specifically if I'm going to be talking about a time period, or when I was doing interviews about the history at Samford University, I would have kind of a timeline of when like major events occurred, so that really would help as we were talking through questions, would help us have a reference point. Oh, that was actually in 1967, or, you know, it's just, you know, a lot of times you're interviewing an older person and they've lived through a lot. So it just really helps to have a basic timeline. And, you know, even when I'm doing interviews about a specific topic, so for instance, the interview project I'm producing right now that's on downtown Birmingham, it's about the Central Business District and specifically historic buildings where restaurants and bars have redeveloped that building and opened a brand new establishment in a historic building. So even though it's somewhat about the building and the renovation, I interview this person about, you know, whether it's the restaurant owner or the bar owner or the developer, I interview them about their whole life history that led up to this moment, because I like to think of all this as like, it's this history of this building and its whole life, and then this history of this person, their whole life, and everything that led up to them connecting with this building at this moment in time, and like changing it forever, and it's changing them forever, and it's like colliding in this beautiful way. And so you really want to collect all of this context on this person while you have them, because you have no idea like what that could turn into and how these stories are going to intertwine. So just collect all of that. I mean, it's just amazing what something that could happen to a person when they're 12, you know, can influence the trajectory of their life so much later. I mean, it's so cool. So all that to say, get as much context as you can. Context is amazing. And kind of speaking of like food and restaurants, the topic of food is just an amazing subject for interviews. So even if your interview has nothing to do with food, especially if you're interviewing someone that's a little shy and like maybe they're just not talking a lot, bringing food into the interview is a great way to trigger memories and you know, times with their family, and they might think of a recipe and then remember some event, and you know, it always helps in my opinion. So that's just something to kind of keep in your bag of tricks if you're having a difficult interview. Or I mean, I always bring up food. But I also like to eat all the time, so maybe it's just always at the forefront of my mind. And then, of course, like, ask very open-ended questions, not things that are just going to get you a yes or no answer. I mean, that goes without saying, I think. But then you can always just, can you tell me more about that? Or how did that make you feel? I mean, there's tons of follow-up questions that can get to a deeper meaning if you do just get into this pattern of a yes or no answer. And then, of course, absolutely don't ever, express any kind of judgment on the person's answers. I mean, you want them to feel that this is very safe, that they can tell you anything. And so you just, I mean, not that you would, but like, just don't want to pass any judgment on their answers, or, either in your face or in the way you ask questions. You're just there to listen to their story, to their experience. You might not agree with it, but you're there to listen to that and see what that is and get background on why they feel that way, So, okay. And then you also, before the interview, and I'll get into equipment in a little bit, but you want to test your equipment before the interview, so you're not like fumbling and nervous. So just like the night before any interview, I check all my batteries, check my SD cards, and just make sure everything's good to go. So we're smooth sailing the next day. And then, factor that into to the time that you tell people. If you think the interview is going to last an hour, then, you might want to say, but block off an hour and a half because I've got to set up my equipment, take down my equipment, release form to sign. So just be mindful of that, because it's easy to forget that. And then I always slate the tape at the beginning. So I'd say, this is Michelle Little interviewing Haley Cotton. This is August 4th, 2022 for the Spark Writing Festival. So just, if you're doing a lot of interviews, you might end up with a bunch of audio and you can't remember what's what. So it's always helpful to just slate the tape at the beginning, so you know what's what in the end. And then I really think this little tidbit will be helpful for you. After an interview, I immediately go to a coffee shop, a library somewhere, and I just download my brain. I write what's called field notes. And so just anything that came to mind during the interview, or, any random thing that occurred during the interview that maybe didn't come through on tape, that might have affected the interview. And because your head will be very full after listening to someone talk for an hour, and you're trying to maintain eye contact with this person, and you're actively listening, so you're not scribbling notes necessarily. So it's just so helpful to immediately go and write down everything that came to mind during the interview, if it made you think of 2 other people that you need to interview. So field notes are incredibly helpful. And I think especially if you're planning to write from your interviews, then I really think field notes would be helpful for you. And then after that, I would immediately download the audio. So don't leave it just sitting on the recorder or on your phone or on an SD card. Archival standards are that you really want to keep the audio in 3 places. So let's say you put it on an external drive, but you would also want to keep it on a cloud service. And then if you can, a server somewhere or on your computer. So then if something happens to the external drive, or something happens to the cloud service, I'm sure that'll happen one day. So try to keep it in 3 places, so that, because you can't really recreate that. I mean, that's priceless, and this person may not be able to sit down with you again. So keep the audio safe. And then I always like to send a thank you note to the narrator. I mean, they have given you they've given you time out of their lives. They've given you their life story. So I just think it's so important to send a thank you note for that gift. And then, and I promise we're getting close to the end of the best practices, because I get that this is a lot. So after that, the next step would be to transcribe. And I know you may not have the capacity for that or the resources, but if you happen to have grant funding and can like get the Cadillac of transcriptions, then there is this amazing center out of Boston that, I mean, they're just lightning fast. They have real live professionals that do that, to the point that if you were doing interviews in the medical field, they would have like retired nurses that would know all the medical jargon. I mean, they're amazing. So they're out of Boston. They're called the Audio Transcription Center. So that's my top recommendation. But if you don't, and most people won't have grant funding, of course, but there are these two that I know of personally, platforms that do transcription for you. It's automated and it's reasonably priced. And so one of them that I use a lot is called Trint, Trint. And then another one that I just found out about this week that a very good friend of mine has had excellent experience with, and that actually does well with Southern accents, whereas Trint might not do so well with Southern accents, just FYI. So this other one is called Sonix, Sonix. And my friend had just a great experience with it. So these services are going to be around $10 to $15 for an hour of audio. Or Trent might be a monthly fee now, like you subscribe, I think. But either way, I mean, it's reasonable, I think. And you just upload the audio, it spits out a transcription, and then you can go back in, clean it up. It'll let you slow down the audio so you can listen and, type in if you need to really work on a section. So it's amazing that there's plenty of other options like that out there. Those are just the two that I feel good about recommending. So if you can do the transcription, then, send it back to your narrator, let them look over it, make sure they feel good about it. And if you really want to get fancy, you can also edit the audio to match the transcription. That's kind of the gold standard, but I really understand that that's probably not going to be at the forefront of your goals here. So that's all I'm going to say about the best practices. I know that was just a ton. Do we have any questions about like ethics or best practices? I'm trying to look in the chat to see. Okay. I don't see anyone completely lost and fumbling here. Okay. So the last thing I'm going to go over tonight, and then we'll have some time for questions, is about equipment, just some equipment options. And of course, use what you have the budget for, use what you're comfortable with. I will say that half of the battle with audio recordings is really about controlling background noise. And so, I mean, even if you can only use your phone, that's all you have, then it's okay. You can do so much by eliminating background noises. So don't record in a coffee shop. It's a terrible idea. You want to try to shoot for there's always rooms you can reserve at libraries, quiet rooms in the back of libraries. If you can record in someone's home, that's going to be a step better than libraries, because there's usually more there's softer surfaces. So you want to look for rooms that have carpeting, Not a ton of windows. If there are windows, like some kind of drapes and like a fluffy couch, or sometimes I go out and do what's called tape syncs. And so say there's a producer in Europe and they want to record someone in Alabama. So I go and I literally hold the microphone in front of this person's face while the producer's on the phone conducting the interview. And so I did one just recently, and when I got to the home and I looked everywhere, and the only room that there was carpeting and not just wooden furniture was the bedroom. So I had to do the interview in the bedroom, which is awkward, but the audio was fantastic. So there was carpet, there was a big fluffy bed. So there's just a ton you can do with like your situation control if you can't afford fancy equipment. So don't worry about that. But if you can spend a little bit of money, I mean, of course, if you're going to use your phone, I think we all know there's plenty of voice memo apps. So I think you're good on that. But I really like, and I kind of love that we're doing this like this way, because I can show you these props. When we did this in person, I didn't carry all this with me. So I love Zoom recorders. And so this is a tiny, like this could be a baby step intro into equipment for you guys. This was my very first little personal recording equipment. And so you can see there's not a million buttons. There's like the one recording. There's 2 microphones up here, and very easy to use. And I'd also really recommend, if you can, this is a tiny little lav mic. And so you can just pop that in there, and then you just put this on the person's shirt. And so this little guy, less than $100. This is a Zoom H1. And then you can get lav mics for around $100. And this little guy's great. You can keep him in your purse, and very, very easy to travel with. So there's also a Zoom H2 that's maybe twice that size, and that's what we always used for students. Those were our field kits. We had tons of those at Sanford, and you could check them out at the library. Again, not a ton of buttons. Only once in all the years I was at Sanford did I have a student that just didn't hit record. So very low fail rate on that. And then, if you do this for years and you want to like move on up, I have an H6. And so still like not a ton of buttons, very user friendly. It has 6 microphone ports. So I use external mics, and I mean, it's just great, super easy to use. Now, some headphones so that you can actually listen to what you're collecting. You can tell if the person isn't being heard at all. I mean, that would be it's heartbreaking if you do an interview and then you realize you can barely hear the audio. And you really won't know unless you have the headphones on and you know what you're actually picking up. And then you can move the microphone closer, or you can adjust the gain. So I can't recommend headphones enough. And these are like a very standard, these Sonys, they're maybe $86. And these are the MDRs, and they're just great studio headphones. And they fold up like this, very easy to carry. So those are just a few equipment options. There's a ton of stuff out there that I've just always used Zoom. And whatever you use, try to record in WAV files and not MP3s. So WAV is going to capture much more of the person's voice and so like if you think of audio, if you think of the sound, it's the waves are like this, And the MP3 is really only capturing like this much of that, but a WAV file is capturing so much more. So just look out for that. And then of course, now we can record on Zoom, like Haley's recording this, and I've found the audio quality to be pretty good on Zoom. Another tool that I used during the pandemic when we could not see people in person is called Zencastr. So Zencastr, and it's a podcasting recording platform, and it records great audio. It does really well, even if the person you're interviewing, sometimes people I was interviewing didn't have great mics. And so I don't know what kind of magic this platform is, but somehow they still, the audio would be fantastic. And so I think now they do have video on Zencastr, but at the beginning of the pandemic, I'd call the person on Zoom so that we could see each other. And then I would pull up Zencastr, and that was actually recording the audio. So, I mean, so now you can do interviews with people all over the country and internationally with these great podcasting and video recording tools. So, I mean, the possibilities are just limitless. And then, of course, you want to make sure you have enough storage. These files can be fairly big. So make sure you got enough of an external drive or enough space on your computer, just something to keep all these safe, to keep everything in one place. Okay, so that was a ton. That was a ton of information, guys. So let me know what questions you have. What can I answer here?
I did have a question about so you get like really excited about all of these connections and the people and stuff and like the possibilities for oral history. How do you narrow down your projects at all? Like, I know you talk about food and you've worked with the foodways, but what makes you go like, no, that's the project that I'm doing, those are the people I'm gonna go talk to?
I think sometimes it's because I always have ideas for projects in my head, but I might not know personally who those narrators are. So I gravitate towards projects where I already know maybe 2 to 3 people that would be willing to do interviews, particularly if they're people sort of within my networks, because I know that they might feel comfortable talking to me. And so I do kind of have to like overlap my interests and random project ideas with people in the real world I actually know. Like I think I've always wanted to do this interview project, probably just because I watched that show Halt and Catch Fire, but I've always wanted to do an interview project on like the beginning of the personal computer age and college professors that were trying to teach the computer classes as this was like coming out, just the breakneck speed. But I don't know anybody that could talk to me about that. So I'll probably never get to do that project, even though it fascinates me. Everybody's very quiet tonight. Oh. Participants almost always get nervous because of that. Yeah, yes, for sure. Yeah, people, especially, so this year I had to do, the project I was doing for the Southern Foodways Alliance, they wanted them videoed. And I'm not even comfortable. I don't like being videoed. It makes me nervous when the video cameras come out. So one thing that helped, because I had a filmmaker there, and so while she was setting up the equipment, it helped that I could be the one interacting with the person to kind of ease. So if you have anyone else you can involve in your project that they are running the equipment and you're the one that's just interacting and doing the interview, that helps a ton. I mean, the filmmaker and I both noticed that because she and I both typically just work alone. and you're trying to set up all this equipment, but at the same time, you're trying to, make the narrator feel comfortable. And those are two completely different hats to wear. So if you can have someone else there, that's the best option. Or if you can get all of it set up when they're maybe like, if they're out of the room doing something else, and then you can bring them in and try to, talk to them about some other things so that they don't really notice the microphone as much as if you're like pulling it out of your bag and setting up all, that just, it's like the doctor setting up all the shots to give you or something. It just makes you nervous. So, but yeah, it's hard to overcome. And sometimes the second half of the interview will be better. I think, people sometimes just have to take a breath, take a gulp of water, and then a lot of times after 15 minutes, they'll feel a little bit better. And so you just kind of have to know that first 15 minutes might be rough, but you can get them back there. Just maintain that eye contact. And, sometimes I just make a joke about it. I'm like, I know the microphone makes me nervous too, just go ahead and talk about it, so, but yeah, it's a thing. It happens to everybody. An all-time favorite interview? Oh my gosh. It's so hard. I think some of my favorite interviews, when I did the StoryCorps project, the year before the pandemic. And so in 2019, I did a StoryCorps project with WBHM, and and I don't know, well, probably the 3 that we aired were maybe my favorite, but it would be hard. I felt like they were all my children. I mean, it was a series of 27 interviews, and there were 2 participants. And so it's your typical StoryCorps style interview where they're interviewing each other. But I would start out the interview, like I would get them chatting, and then they would kind of take it from there. But that project was amazing and kind of just restored my faith in humanity. It was called the One Small Step Project, and it was people on different sides of the political spectrum. And they applied to be part of this project, and then we would match them up and bring them together, and they would talk for an hour, and it was incredible. It was just incredible, the ground that we covered and how willing everyone was to share their stories. Nobody got in a fight. Nobody got mad. So those might be some of my all-time favorite interviews, but that's a super hard question. But thank you for that question.
If you could interview anyone, living or dead, just anyone, who is like your ultimate person that you would want to talk to, that you would want to gather their stories?
Okay, this is going to sound very selfish. I mean, but I have been researching, I've never even thought of that question. So I was kind of panicking there, but I have my great grandmother's diaries from the 1920s, and I transcribed them during the pandemic because her handwriting is very flowery and it's difficult to read. And I also wanted to have them in a computer document so I could search them. And I have about 5 years, and it was actually, she died very young of cancer. So it was the last 5 years of her life. And I'm planning to interview my family members about, anyone that can remember. I do have some very old aunts and uncles that did get to meet her. And so, but I would love to interview her. I mean, she was just kind of this firecracker and just so unexpected. And after reading someone's diaries for 5 years of their life, it's so hard to think like, I'll never get to talk to her. I have so many questions. So that's a very selfish answer of all the people that have ever lived. But right now, that's who I want to interview.
No, that's a really good answer.
I want to write a book of because as I was reading it and transcribing it during the pandemic, like so many of her day-to-day experiences were lining up with my day-to-day experiences during the pandemic, just how like small our lives became. And I mean, it was kind of weird, just the overlaps and the random things. And so I'd love to figure out how to write a book about all that one day.
That would be incredible. I'd love to see like a side by side, like a chapter by chapter, almost sort of discovering you and discovering her alongside each other.
Yeah. Who knows? Maybe it'll happen one of these days.
Do you guys in the meeting, do you have any ideas for any potential oral histories that you'd like to gather? Anyone in your life that you'd like to interview? Any projects maybe that you're already working on? I'd love to hear about those.
Yeah, and I mean, family members are a great place to start, you guys. I think if you're trying to think of people, I think we often think we know everything about our parents, or if any of your grandparents are still living. But I sat down and interviewed my dad one time, and I mean, clearly I did not did not know everything. Like, we've only known them for short periods of their life.
Well, if there's no questions and no one's got anything that they want to interview or work on, then I guess that sort of wraps us up for the evening. So thank you so much, you guys, for coming out. Michelle, as always, wonderful to talk to you. I love your enthusiasm and verve for everything. Like, just getting to hear you talk about oral history makes me so excited for it. So I really appreciate you coming back and talking with us again, and wish you the best on all of your projects in the future. So thank you guys for coming out, and we'll catch you on the flip side. So y'all take care.
Have a good night, everyone.